I guess, hi, my name is Mairghread Scott. I've been a fan of Transformers, gosh, for a really long time. I started when I was young. I grew up with the Beast Wars show, and I sort of fell in love with that. And I was a little too old by the time Beast Machines came around to get into that. And Transformers kind of dropped off the map for me. Saw all the Michael Bay movies. I thought they were really great. And then I got a call from a friend of mine on the Transformers Prime show, and they were like, hey, do you want to come over? And we need a writer's assistant. And so I was like, absolutely. Came over, and one of my jobs as a writer's assistant was to sort of dive into the mythology and the backstory. And so, as well as being a fan growing up, I've also sort of become a professional fan. And when I heard from Mike Johnson about Rage of the Dinobots that, Mike had written with us on the show, Mike worked for Kurtzman and Orsi, and he let me know, I'm working on this comic, it's supposed to link in with all this continuity stuff. He knew I was really good with Transformers. We call it the aligned continuity. And so he was like, do you want to team up? And we did, and everything worked out great, and now we're doing it again.
Yeah, that's awesome. That actually sort of goes into what I wanted to ask next. I was going to ask, what your duties are working on Transformers Prime, but you said that you do a lot of research and study. What resources do you use for that?
Well, there are a couple of different kinds of research I do as the writer's assistant. Or you're also in live action, you'd sometimes hear my job be called a script coordinator, but in animation, the two both kind of mean the same things. They mean different things in live action, but they don't mean the same things in animation. And basically, the three main jobs I have on Transformers are, one, I check all the scripts and make sure everyone's on the same page, that they get cleared through legal and that everything's spelled right and stuff, which can be harder than you think on Transformers sometimes.
Well, sometimes there's no consensus on what the spelling actually is. So
yes. Sometimes people have been called multiple things over the years, and so it's like, no, they're always spelled this way. The other aspect that I have is, there are 2 novels and 2 video games, 3 video games that we're supposed to be in continuity with that are part of the quote-unquote aligned continuity. So the Exiles and the Exodus novel, the War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron, and then the Transformers Prime. I believe it was a Wii video game. It was just called Transformers Prime. Mm-hmm. And so it's my job, I had to read all of those and play through all of those, and then I sort of...
That's such a hard job.
Everyone loves playing the video games with me at first, and then I'm like, oh, you have to go back and click that box, and now click that box, and okay, let's restart this game so that guy can say that one line again, because I really need to hear that one line. Then they don't like playing with it so much. But so I keep track and make sure that we're in continuity with them, and then I also, whenever we're just brainstorming and stuff, I'll mine through the old issues and the old, sweep through the wikis and stuff, and okay, well, we kind of want someone who's kind of like this. Well, who can we go through? And I'll talk with Brand, who's available and who can fill that slot. Or if we're brainstorming ideas, well, these are some kind of wacky ideas we've seen before in Transformers, or this is kind of how this thing works in Transformers. So it helps get our more freelance writers, gives them a running start. And it also makes it a lot easier for me to do these kinds of, comics that are bridging multiple platforms.
Well, the next question was going to be about how much of an influence the various aspects of the aligned continuity were, but you kind of touched on that in your last answer. If there's anything more you'd like to expand on with that, though?
Yeah, how much of that do you have to take into consideration with what you do? It sounds like you're pretty involved in following that.
Well, look, in any way that, there's always a point where I have to take off my day job coordinator hat and I have to put on my night job just writer hat. And so it's any way I can acknowledge the continuity or explain the continuity or work with the continuity, we make every effort to do that. There are times where you you don't always necessarily get to delve into every continuity thing. I know on Rage of the Dinobots, like, everyone was like, oh my gosh, she's got to go into House Sludge, made it back to all the Dinobots. And it's like, we don't have the page space for that in this one, but we'll do it eventually. But it's there. We think everything through, and I try very hard. And my partner Mike and I have many discussions about how much information we can put into anyone's story. But the most important thing when you're writing any kind of story is to, first and foremost, write a good story. Obviously, I don't think anyone would want us to just do, there are lots of great sites and stuff like that that just explain long histories of each characters, but that's not the most visual fun thing to do in a comic or when I write the TV show. The most fun thing to do is to tell a great story, and hopefully we cannot contradict anything in the continuity, and we can shed a little light on some aspects of the continuity. So that's our main goal.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, prioritizing the great storytelling first. There's some writers that don't really get that concept, and that's great to hear.
Yeah, it sounds like you're able to use the continuities, and you kind of try and tie them together, but you're not constrained by all the other takes on the aligned continuity, and I think that's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we try and consider, because as someone who's also written for Transformers Prime, I really wanted, and Mike, because he wrote for Transformers Prime as well, we wanted the comics to have that same level of storytelling, and it's a really intense level of storytelling and emotion, and so it was very important to us that we felt like we were delivering not necessarily the I don't want to say like seriousness, because then you think of like, oh, it's got to be grim 24/7, but the sort of gravitas that the Prime characters give.
When did work on the Beast Hunters book begin? Was it being planned alongside Rage of the Dinobots, or did you start on Rage first?
We found out we were going to do Rage. We wrote Rage all the way through, and then when it was in the last issue, we turned in, and it was a few weeks later, and they said, do you want to keep going? Do you want to do Beast Hunters? And we had, obviously when we did Rage, we talked about, like, if we wanted to go on, these are places we could go, but we didn't actually they didn't officially pull the trigger until after Beast Hunters was written, so, and in the canon in process.
Okay. Well, that largely answers my next question, which was, basically, I was curious if one of the main ideas behind Rage of the Dinobots was to bring people who had only seen Prime up to speed on what had happened in Fall of Cybertron, or or not. So.
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things you'll see in Rage, and it kind of, you haven't seen it yet, but it's so funny. I can't wait for you guys to see Season 3, because we knew that, coming out of the Fall of Cybertron video game, look, it happens thousands of years before the Transformers Prime TV show takes place, and on a different planet. So we were like, how do we touch in? But there are a lot of little Easter eggs and ideas in Rage that when you watch Season 3, you'll be like, oh my gosh, they talked about that in Rage, or they mentioned that in Rage. So it's one of those things where it doesn't necessarily, you're not going to read it and be like, oh, this is where Season 3 is going to go. But when you watch Season 3 and you pick Rage up again, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, it was all there.
Cool.
So that's what we're hoping. At least I hope so.
One thing we really appreciate is where you said that Beast Hunters would be taking a 2-issue story approach. So it'll be easier for new readers to pick up the comic without being completely lost. Do you feel like this also brings the comic writing process more in line with how you would write episodes for TV?
It does. And we wanted to do it for two different reasons. One is that, it's a format that Mike worked really successfully on Star Trek that I actually always admired as a reader, because it just makes it easier for new readers to pick up in issue 1 and, or pick up in issue 2 and get last month's issue. And we really wanted the comic to be very accessible. it does bring it more in line with how you would write a TV show. We actually write Beast Hunters, the comic, a lot like we would write Prime, the TV show, and that we sort of both talk about where we're going, and we hear each other's individual episodes, but when it comes to breaking out those episodes, it's like, okay, I'm doing this, you're doing this, all right, we're moving forward, and then we'll just touch base. All right, we like where we are, okay, we're moving to the next step, touch base again, you know? So that's really pleasant. But the other thing, too, is that, you know, there are some really great IDW Transformers comics going on right now. And one of the things that I like best about the other lines are that they are so, you know, involved, and it's such intensive storytelling. And we're like, you know, instead of competing with these long-form stories, let's see if we can do something different. If we can give fans a little bit more of, you know, bite-sized pieces of stories.
Mm-hmm.
I want to jump in with a quick question here. From what you were saying, it sounds like, for example, it sounds like you'll be working primarily on one story for Beast Hunters and Mike will be working on another one?
Yeah, we're both involved with breaking it, but then we sort of, one of us will be the primary writer, and then the other person will just come in with the notes. So the same way that, like, if you were writing TV, you know, all our writers would be in a room, and you know, you all pitch out your ideas, everyone agrees that we like that idea, we all agree on where we're going, and then someone goes off and writes it, and you come back and touch base. So it's that same kind of process.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like that approach of sort of being an alternative to, like, Robots in the Skies and More Than Meets the Eye and, you know, Regeneration 1. I mean, great comics, but, you know, this is a much... It's kind of... Okay, so, like, I love More Than Meets the Eye. I mean, I'm a big comics fan, and it's one of the best comics I read, and I'm not grading it on a curve. Like, you know, in the past, we've had to grade Transformers comics on a curve. So this is a great Transformers comic. But, you know, like, these comics are, like, genuinely great comics. But they are long story arcs, so if I fall back in a month or two, it takes me a while to catch back up. And having these bite-sized chunks, that's a great approach, and, you know, I think that'll work out well.
Yeah,
because one of the things that I had with my comic book friends is that when I would talk to my comic book friends, there'd be a lot of interest in Transformers, but people just didn't know where to start or where to get in, and there was this sort of feeling that Transformers was kind of its own thing, you know, its own little isolated comics world, and we really wanted to sort of break that down. Like, I want you to be able to give a Transformers comic to any of your friends that reads any kind of comic, and have them be able to get on board. You know, we always like to say that our motto is, all you need to know is that Transformers are robots that turn into things. That's it.
And that's great.
Yeah, that is great. And in general, I think IDW is doing a great job, and a much better job than maybe in the past of handling licensed comics. These characters. Nicole really loves, I guess it's the Ponies comic.
My Little Pony.
Yeah, My Little Pony.
Yeah, and she like really loves that, and I've heard a lot of great buzz around it. I haven't read it, but in general, like, all of the IDW books are, you know, knocking it out of the park. Star Trek, Ghostbusters, and all of those are doing really well. That's really cool. So I guess in sort of writing, you know, both the TV series and the comics, if there are any stories that are pitched for the series that don't necessarily make it to the series because you have a constraint of a certain number of episodes that you can actually fit in, will some of those stories or ideas be explored in the comic, perhaps?
Oh, well, we've always had a really open, close relationship. So if you guys notice that Mike's graphic novel that he did for Transformers Prime became an episode of Transformers Prime. His first graphic novel became the episode that featured Shockwave in Season 2, which I'm totally... Was it Out of the Past? I totally forget the name of it.
I believe that's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was the flashback episode right after... It was actually right after mine episode, so it would have been episode 217. But yeah, it was completely... He pitched the idea as a graphic novel, and we really liked it, and we were like, yeah, let's put it right in. And... This is definitely, comics are definitely a place where we can explore a little bit more. You know, the thing about CG is there aren't any constraints on the kinds of stories you tell, but there are a lot of constraints about sometimes the way that you can tell them. So, you know, where you can set a story, or how many characters can you have, how many new characters can you introduce. That all is something that has to be constantly factored in with CG, which is why, as you may have noticed, we spend a lot of time in canyons. So we have fantastic, beautiful characters, and we have fantastic, beautiful canyons, and we've lit those canyons every which way that we possibly can to feel like all kinds of amazing, different canyons. But you can't necessarily, pitch a story where you're like, oh my gosh, we're going to do a road trip on Cybertron, and we're going to go to this location, and then we're going to go to this location, we're going to do that. Like, you couldn't do G.I. Joe Renegades as Transformers in CG. That would just be sort of a little too crazy. And the comics are a real chance to sort of get to push those. And I personally really want to explore more of Cybertron. I just think that Cybertron is such a cool place. I really think you can get a lot of visual impact out of the planet of Cybertron.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are opportunities to revisit things from the past. G1, Generation 1 had a lot of interesting concepts around Cybertron. You said that you were a little too old for Beast Machines. I was in my early 20s. But I know that's sad. But one thing that we haven't really had a chance to revisit is what happened to Cybertron, after Beast Machines. Certainly it's a different continuity. It's not part of the Aligned continuity, but certain themes could still be revisited or touched on, or Easter eggs could be inserted that, there's a lot of opportunity there, and that sounds great.
Oh, yeah, we were always looking for that. And even just, one of the things I really wanted to try and capture a little bit in Rage of the Dinobots was just how beautiful Fall of Cybertron was as a game. And one of the things that we want to keep on capturing and want to explore even more is just, I love the idea of essentially a living planet, there are always things moving on Cybertron, and it's not a solid planet, there's layers of underground, and there's essentially a whole Underdark of Cybertron, and we're really anxious to sort of explore that. What does a Cybertronian mountain look like? What does a Cybertronian cavern look like? How does a Cybertronian cave-in work, or how does a Cybertronian, those, just really push a very extreme kind of landscape.
You've already answered most of this, but you've said that there are going to be plot elements and little nods to what's going on in the third season of Prime in the book. Are we going to see specific characters that appear in both places? I would imagine Shockwave would be one, but other than that...
Well, you'll see some. One of the constraints that we have is that we had to make sure that, the show is always leading the charge. So it's not, we wanted to make sure that you're not going to read something in the comic that's going to spoil something in the TV show. So we're always working a little bit behind the TV show. But once things in the TV show open up, they will definitely, as soon as, essentially their assets or their characters or their scenery becomes available to us, that is definitely then immediately thrown in up for grabs for our storytelling. So there are going to be definitely things that interact, but we just want to make sure, because we're in continuity with the show, that we stay within continuity with the show. So if a character is on Earth, then they're not also on Cybertron at the same time, just to avoid the kind of thing you'll sometimes see where, even though I love Marvel, there's always that joke of how many teams can Wolverine be on, or how many teams can Spider-Man be on.
Yeah.
We really want you to feel like our comic is happening at the same time as the TV show, and you don't have to sort of squint your eyes and be like, oh, except for that, except for that, except for that.
You had mentioned earlier about the limitations of using the CG cartoon format in terms of settings, but also in terms of characters. So with the freedom the comic book gives you, do you have plans to introduce characters from the toy line that have gone largely untouched otherwise?
We have interesting things for characters, too. We would like to touch on characters of the toy line. I'm going to be real honest and say that I kind of have a wish list from G1 and, my own personal... I know, Mike, we all have our own personal little pile of Transformers that we desperately want to see back. So we're definitely pushing them. But trust me, the Hasbro brand, they make fantastic toys, and we want to showcase those toys, and they want us to showcase those toys. So it's all a nice, happy family. We're moving together.
What does the future hold for you?
God, I really can't say. Not because I don't know, but
That's a good
I just
answer.
don't know how much has been announced.
That's a good answer. I like that.
Yeah,
answer.
that's a very good answer.
That's a happy answer.
Yeah, that's a habit. But just to know that, I'm well, and I'm writing, and Beast Hunters is moving forward, and other things are moving forward, and we hope to live on Cybertron for a very long time.
Very cool.
Cool.
So I guess at this point there's not a known endpoint to the Beast Hunters comic. It's just going to go as long as it's supported.
Well, as far as I know.
Yeah, it's not a miniseries like Rage of the Dinobots.
No, we haven't designed it to be, Rage of the Dinobots we always knew was going to be 4 issues and out. Right. So this we have continued to hopefully build and grow for as long as we can do it. Dudes, guys, don't you want to hear about how the story starts?
Yeah.
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 If you can tell us, tell us.
So we start the story. The whole story is about the fact that, we really... I don't want to be too spoilery, but we really we took all the characters from Rage, and remember how they said they were gonna stay on Cybertron and take care of things. Mm-hmm. Well, we decided to bump them way far in the future, and essentially the Dinobots are attempting to keep a small group of survivors alive, and they've actually had to retreat into Cybertron's underground caverns and form their own kind of little Dinobot city that Grimlock and the Dinobots are running.
That sounds cool.
It is very cool. And we really tried to play the idea that, there's this great tension with the fact that, they're Dinobots, yay, we're accepted and we're heroes, but also, in a lot of ways the Dinobots are great heroes and they're great fighters, but they're not necessarily super adept at, what's the old phrase, the people who are great generals don't necessarily make great kings.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of tension with the fact that, Grimlock is great in a fight, but a lot of running, taking care of a group of people is not fighting. And
yeah,
that's
he does not strike me as a peacetime commander, no.
He really struggles with that. He's really struggling with peacetime commander, and that is something that it's not peacetime by any means, but yeah, that's something we really want to push, is that, it's a weird thing, and I think in a lot of ways the Dinobots, their lives would have been easier if they were still outcasts that no one wanted to talk to. It's harder when you're the heroes that everyone looks up to.
Administration's never fun.
Yeah.
Exactly, and we're going to get to explore all that richness too, because as their roles grow, essentially each of the Dinobots has been able to grow more as their own character. So the first couple of issues are all about Sludge and his life and how he views everything. And yes, I will finally explain what happened to Sludge in the tunnels. I know what happened to Sludge in the tunnels.
And see,
but
that's
you
one
guys
thing I
have
really
to remember
enjoyed.
that the problem that we faced was that at the end of that scene in the video game, Jazz takes out his short-term memory, so Sludge doesn't know what happens to Sludge in the tunnels.
Oh.
And the Dinobots weren't there, so the Dinobots didn't. So we ran into the problem where everyone was like, you should totally tell that story. And it's like, as soon as we get a character who knows that story, who would tell that story, we will tell that story.
Mm-hmm. Here's a quick question. How many issues are done at this point? How many are written and how many are planned ahead of that?
That's trade secret.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So more planned than you would think, more written than you would think, at least outlined. In terms of scripting, we're moving forward. That's all a trade secret. And it's a little different on this series because since the way we're working, we can sort of tag team a little more. But it's definitely a lot faster turnaround than anything you do for television because it takes it takes a little more than a year for a Prime TV episode.
Wow.
Yeah.
So no, it's funny. No one thinks about that, but yeah, it takes a little more than a year from the time that I come up with an idea for a Prime TV episode to the time that it actually airs.
I know that Takara Tomy, they're doing Transformers Prime figures, but they're not getting the fiction, are they? They're not getting the series.
I have no idea about that.
Okay.
Hasbro. That would probably be like a Mike Kelly question or a Hasbro question. So
okay.
But yeah, we're not. They just tell us they want us to write things, and we say thank you, and we write them. And we're very happy to write them.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, that's a funny thing that people think a lot of times that like, oh, how'd you guys pitch this idea? But it was more that like, a lot of times with branded work, the brand knows that it wants someone to write this, and then they come to you and they say, hey, do you have an idea if we wanted you to do X story with, if we wanted you to do X characters? And it was like, oh, okay, yeah, great. We pitched this idea, so.
Does that make it easier or harder?
It depends. It really depends on the brand, and it depends on the editors and the kind of stories you were telling. In a way, it was actually really nice working on Rage, because it was really clear, because we knew that they wanted to do something that tied in with Fall of Cybertron, and that tied Fall of Cybertron to Prime, and that they wanted the Dinobots to be involved. And so that made it really clear for us, like, okay, well, we know that the Dinobots are here, where do we want to take them, we know where we're going, and then you sort of carve your story out, which is how I am used to storytelling. There are other times where you have your own, like, oh, we should totally do this, or we should do that, or we'll shoot the Dinobots into space. It'll be great.
I want to see that.
But that's
one of the recurring elements in your answers has been how you have a lot of the story elements worked out in advance in your head, and that it makes me so look forward to the Beast Hunters series upcoming, because some of my favorite fiction has had a writer or writers behind it who have that quality where they can see way down the road where all this is going. So that really gets me excited for this book.
Well, thank you. It's funny because I feel like I always end up writing the really emotionally charged episodes, because I think that one of the things about a well-written character, and fortunately Transformers has a lot of really well-written characters, is that they just have natural tensions. There are natural things that you can see coming. So, when I was working on Stronger Faster, I knew that, like, oh, I want to do something with, Ratchet is actually kind of an aggressive personality. He never gets to express that. Like, let's do that. Or when I was working on Herd, it was like, well, clearly we know that Miko is super passionate about her friend, and she kind of has a low capacity for planning ahead.
And my compliments to you on that episode, because Miko can be a kind of abrasive character, and to date, that is my favorite Miko episode. That was really good.
That was the episode where I was like, dang it, I'm going to make people like Miko. Because she's actually a great character to write for, because she goes after what she wants.
I can see that. I can totally see that.
But,
I mean, you succeeded totally, too.
Yeah.
I'm actually really surprised and totally happy that they let me do that episode. Because from day one, I was like, Miko... One day when Miko's 22 and she's basically Sarah Connor on, like, Bulkhead with a Gatling gun, everyone's going to love her.
You mentioned you came into Transformers on Beast Wars. Do we have you to thank for the Bantor reference in the one episode of Transformers Prime?
Oh my gosh. Dwayne wanted our story editor. He'll do things where he'll just email me and he's like, oh my gosh, I want, what are types of money that they use on Cybertron, or what kind of sports do people play on Cybertron, or what's a funny reference here. So the question was sort of, what's the most absurd thing that Ratchet can refer to? And it was like, oh, Bantor.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome.
Everybody loved that one.
Although he came up with the tiger in his tank. That was...
And you just added the mandrill.
Yeah, I was just like, I gave him a list of, like, here's a half a dozen, like, crazy Transformers. I was really pushing for the one who's half fish, half bee.
Yes.
I think it was from one of the Japanese runs.
Injector.
Yeah, but Injector was actually, not that it's important, but released here in the U.S.
This is just the kind of nerds we are, I'm sorry.
But Injector, I think...
I will pay good money for an Injector toy. I think the idea of a fish bee transformer, just to sit there and look like, oh my gosh, it's the fish bee.
I'm pretty sure Injector goes for cheap on eBay.
If you could time travel back to 1999 right now, there's a lot of Kmarts that would love you.
Here's an Injector on eBay now for $13. Here's one for $8. I think you won't have a problem getting an Injector.
No, you won't.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Well, maybe when I go to BotCon, I can trade like a signed copy of something for an Injector.
I probably have an Injector or two that I could give you if you really want one. So.
Oh, thank you.
So that's great. We maybe Retrax could get some love next. I think Retrax is the character that needs to. I love Retrax. Actually,
I really like Cosmos. But I like the version where he just accidentally landed on a Hollywood set and was like, oh, UFO is a great idea to disguise myself as. Like, I also like the version where he's just kind of cynical and jaded and he's like, I'm just going to buzz, humans and pretend to abduct cows whenever I'm bored. But I kind of have a soft spot for the idea that he's just sort of a lovable, guy who is like, oh, this is a fantastic disguise. And then everyone's like, yeah, not so much.
Yeah, I think in Generation 1, most of the characters are either lovable screwballs or little, XVs, basically. I'm thinking of Gears.
Oh, okay.
He's cantankerous.
I wasn't sure where you were going with that one.
He's cantankerous. But yeah.
See, I really like, and I hope I don't screw this up, but I really liked Wheelie, and I thought about writing him, but then I remembered that you have to rhyme everything.
Not if it's Japanese. So I think...
if it's a Japanese continuity, they dropped that because I guess that's just too hard for them.
And he's also a little jerk too. So.
Yeah.
I relate to Japanese Wheelie, I have to admit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's fun writing jerks. You've read Slug. Slug's a jerk, and that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love when they're like, we should all go rescue the Autobots, and he's like, nuts to the Autobots. I don't want to rescue the Autobots. You go rescue the Autobots.
If you could fit Willie in, that would be pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but if I do, he's not going to rhyme, because that's just too much work.
That's okay.
Fair enough.
That's okay.
Sure.
It's hard enough as it is. You can still pre-order in Diamond the trade of Rage, and you can pre-order the first issue of Beast Hunters. They're both in Diamond right now. And I think if you submit your order, you can submit your order to the 18th for your local comic book store.
Okay.
So if anyone hears it and you like the idea, you can get it on your pull list.
Okay, cool. Want to cover any other secrets?
We are introducing a couple of new characters there will be fresh faces right from the start of Beast Hunters. So that's really important to us that we use that space in comic books to introduce new people. But I think I'm just going to tease that one.
Okay.
Because I think you guys will never guess who shows up to the Dinobots looking for help. And I hope everyone loves it as much as I do.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I'm definitely picking that up.
But, no, I guess I would say that to any Transformers fans out there, if you ever have any questions, we are always here. You can tweet me. I'm at Mairghread Scott on Twitter. And I'm M. Scott Writes on Tumblr. My blog name, I think if you can search those, my blog name is Shotgun Mermaid. So...
Okay.
So yeah, you guys can always reach out to me, and if I can answer you, I will answer you. And if I can't answer you, I will at least make a delightfully sarcastic comment. And Mike is not on Twitter, but if you have anything for Mike, I will definitely get you a response.
Very cool. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
This has been great.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, no, tell all everyone.